There's no doubt that business moves faster on the web, but what happens when a signature is needed to close a deal? Too often, ink and paper are still required. But that's changing thanks to innovations in digital transaction management technology and e-signatures. Hi, I'm Stan Gibson, and I'll be your host and moderator for this live interactive webcast. Joining me to explore the topic of e-signature technology and how it could change your business are Jim Lundy, CEO and lead analyst of Aragon Research. Welcome, Jim. It's great to have you with us today.
Hey, Stan. I'm looking forward to our broadcast. Thanks for having me.
And Rahim Kaba, Director of Product Marketing at eSign Live by Solanus. Thanks for joining us, Rahim.
Thank you, Stan. Looking forward to today's event.
Well, before we dive in, just a quick word about this webcast. We are live and interactive, and that means we want to hear from you and our audience. You may participate in two ways. First, if you have a question at any time, please do type it into the Q&A box on your screen, and then press the Submit button. We'll do our best to answer your question during the Q&A segment of the webcast.
Great, Stan. Thank you very much. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. And we're going to talk about digital transaction management and what that means relative to paper and a technology called e-signatures. And really, when you step back and look at where we are in the world, nearing the end of 2015, the idea of making businesses run faster, we think, is the reason why e-signatures and getting rid of paper is one of the lead stories that you sometimes don't hear about in digital transformation. And so in the short time I'm with you today, that's one of the things we're going to talk about, which is really the shifting work to a fully digital world. And, paper is one of those analog technologies that sometimes gets in the way, even though it's been around for a long time. We'll come back and talk about that. But there's a lot of implications when you say the future of work is digital. There's a lot of things that are happening in the world today. I'm based in Silicon Valley, and I've covered content management, a lot of the technologies, including imaging, that come to bear when you're trying to conduct business. And so we've seen dramatic changes that we're going to talk about in some of the content I'm going to share with you today. But when you step back and think about what it means when we say that the future of work is all about being digital, there's a lot of implications for that. So when we talk about some of the things we're going to cover today, there's basically a couple of items on the agenda. And, we're going to cover a couple key trends. We're going to talk about applications and technologies. And we're going to talk about, one of the things that a lot of times enterprise content architects worry about, which is how do you manage transactions in light of all the other technologies such as enterprise content management and collaboration. And then finally, how do you get a competitive advantage? So with that, let's go ahead and dive in. So the world of computing is shifting, and really one of the reasons we identified digital transaction management as a business category, which is different than technology, is really going all the way back 4 years ago when the tablet computer first came online. And, we made some projections, in that year where we said that because of digital technology like displays such as tablets, and that's really what it is, it would start to mean that, paper transactions could be more digital. And so when you look all the way till now, and we see that, things just like the poll we just did, digital transactions are increasing. There's more ways to conduct digital business than we've ever had. In fact, you can even sign a contract today on a wearable device. So there's a lot of things that are kind of coming online. We think that, speech technology is going to make it easier. In fact, in a couple of years, we're predicting that you'll be able to sign a contract by using your voice to authorize the computer to do your signature. So there's a lot of technologies that are driving it, but the biggest thing is that people have access to mobile devices, and that's really one of the big drivers, we think, of things like digital paper. And so when you look at these trends, you say, how do we leverage that? You have to look at, what are your users using? How is the technology being applied to your workforce? How do your customers want to do business with you? Those are some of the things that come to mind. In fact, when we talk about that, mobile is really one of the big things that has been a disruptor in the digital business era. Today, you've probably heard of an app called Uber, which has really caused a lot of disruption in the transportation business. And, taxis have been around since, the late 1800s. In fact, the first taxi actually appeared in Germany. And I think it was a Mercedes taxi, by the way. But now you've got an app you can order a service on. And, today, a lot of times people like to sign a document on a mobile device, whether it's a phone, a tablet, and potentially, as wearables increase, potentially using a watch, or even potentially other types of wearable computing. So paper in business has been around for thousands of years. Paper is still one of the most reliable pieces of content, but now paper is digital. And so that's really the reason why we say digital transaction management is going to be a huge category. And it's kind of subtle. We talk to a lot of people in IT, and there's probably some of you on the phone today. Honestly, from an IT perspective, people look at paper and think it's boring. But when you actually look at the amount of money that's spent on paper and imaging in an enterprise, it's between 1 to 2.5% of all revenue a company produces. It's a phenomenal number. And a lot of times, because it's kind of viewed as boring or not important, it's ignored. And so you've got proliferation of lots of different things. But today, now, business leaders are saying, wait a minute, what is going on here? And so that kind of leads us to this trend. That we have called the rise of digital transaction management. And so anyway, the rise of digital transaction management is here. And we view this as a business application category that will include areas like enterprise content management, parts of office suites. And you can see that, some of these categories are growing quite dramatically. But when we look at the shift of paper to almost a completely digital environment, it dwarfs all of these areas because there's just so much paper in the enterprise. And today, one of the things that's happening is that while people are using e-signatures, they're only using them in a fraction of all of the digital business areas in the enterprise. And so when we look at why we say it's going to be a $30 billion market, we think that's probably low. And again, it always takes a while for business categories to take off. But just from even the poll today, you've seen that there's been dramatic shifts. And again, when you look at this, the tail that wags the dog is really e-signatures. That's really the end of the paper process, and we're going to come back to that and talk about that on how that is becoming, a critical part of technology. Another big shift is the rise of the business buyer. And again, when we've talked to CEOs, these are some of the leaders that are worried about the speed of business and how business is being conducted. So when we actually talk about things like DTM, oftentimes it's business leaders that are pushing hard to say, look, I want to do more of this. I talked to my competitors, and they've basically said, we're doing digital business. So when you look at all different types of categories, digital business is really one of the things that is really making a difference. So again, DTM for onboarding, DTM for sales, DTM for finance, all of these areas are making a big difference. So really the big thing is business buyers want to speed up the business process. And again, they're not waiting for permission. So let's dive into some of the technologies. So this is our technology arc. It's a little bit of an eye chart, but I think you're going to get the slides. This is our technology arc for the digital workplace. And one of the things I've highlighted is some of the areas that we're going to be talking about during the rest of the webinar. And again, emerging technologies that are being adopted, like, we've got electronic signatures still at the early part of adoption. And the mature technologies, including things like enterprise content management. So when you actually look at all of these different areas, we actually see that, for example, digital transaction management, relatively young as a category, but it does include traditional technology applications that make this area starting to move pretty quickly. So when I talk to a lot of decision makers, they say, yeah, we are going to do more of this. And a lot of them are still kind of scratching their head to say, look, we've got so many legacy applications, it's not as easy as we thought it was going to be. But again, one of the things we've taken away is that the business leaders are not afraid of emerging technologies. They're not afraid to dive in because in many cases it's a SaaS application, software as a service, and if it doesn't work, I can just turn it off. Whereas, in years past, it was a bigger deployment. You had to really do due diligence. There were a lot of implications relative to integration. And today, with cloud technology, it's easier than ever to deploy technology.
So just continuing on, let's talk about business and IT. So the business and IT capabilities that are being discussed have a lot to do with what I was just talking about relative to business leaders. I've given this talk relative to both IT leaders and business leaders. Business leaders just want to talk about paper to digital. They know that there's a lot of things under the hood, and this is where IT needs to worry about how you deal with all of the legacy applications. But from a business perspective, it's the big picture of, I have a lot of paper, I need it to be digital. And so there's lightweight DTM processes, and there's heavyweight ones that are more intricate. And, as we talk later and when Rahim talks, again, there's different insertion points and different ways that you can actually dive in. And, again, whether it's workflow, it's, tying it into existing, things like loans or even simple things, sales contracts can be relatively simple, or if you're doing complex order configurations, it can be rather complex. But we're seeing lots of people kind of diving in there, and we'll talk about that as well. DTM is a business application framework. So again, if I'm a technologist, I'm going to look at a lot of things that are involved with putting together a DTM implementation, whether it's content assembly, making sure I've got security, how the applications are integrated. From a business perspective, I'm looking for a lot of the things like, can I do a fast deployment? Is the ease of use there? What about the integration? And, can I make this work both internally and, more importantly, can I make it work externally? So, again, there's a lot of things from a business framework perspective that do need to be considered in addition to the technical considerations. So it's kind of like a different way of looking at business applications than just pure technology. And that's really an important consideration. To be real honest, ease of use is one of the most critical things when we look at e-signature, because if it's not easy to use, the business users are going to reject it. And again, tying this all together into enterprise content management collaboration, we've talked along many years. I've covered ECM, enterprise content management, and the digital life cycle of a document is robust, and there's a lot of different phases of a document that come into play. Signing a contract, or whether it's a business contract or an offer of employment, signing that is usually near the end of the process before sometimes the document is archived. But a lot of the things that come into play when we talk about how DTM is going to be put to use has to do with earlier steps in the life cycle. So really one of the goals should be, when you actually look at your documents and the types of documents that you potentially are using in different types of transactions, is what are all the steps that are involved with the creation, the management, and then finally the execution of a business relationship using an electronic document. The goal should be, you want to keep it fully digital. The problem is that when you have to step out of the digital process and have to go to paper, even though paper in many cases is just an electronic view of a digital document, that's where it goes back to analog, and that's where it all slows down. So again, enterprises should strive to keep it fully digital throughout the life cycle, and if you're doing that, then you're probably going to get and achieve the goal of a full DTM approach. Now, peeling the lens a little bit further, there's different types of content, And again, the mission-critical content is usually where we focus on in DTM. And again, in the workplace, on the left-hand part of the slide, you'll see there's typically three categories, collaboration, content, and portals as far as workplace technology. And portals today are kind of being replaced by mobile and mobile apps. So that's the one area that the lens has changed, where there's millions of mobile apps today, and there's going to be millions more by 2020, many of which will be facilitating DTM. So looking at mission-critical documents, is really a task. And when the documents are mission-critical, generally they're stored in a lot of cases in an enterprise content management system. So if you haven't done a document inventory, that's something that you need to take a look at as far as what are those document processes that maybe because they're partially analog, meaning I'm still using paper, is that slowing me down? Is there a way to do it better and faster? One of the new areas, maybe not so new, but that we have identified that is related to enterprise content management, not totally recognized today except in certain financial areas, is the idea of a document as an asset, meaning that it's tied to something like a loan, a note, and again, a commercial document, where in those assets or those documents that represent assets, they're traded and managed, and in many cases, there's things you need to do with a document asset that go beyond, for example, records management and ECM. So asset management as part of a DTM approach becomes kind of important, where you say, well, that's even more critical of a document, because if I lose that, or if it's tampered with, that would be bad. So if you're on the call and you're in financial services, you probably know what I'm talking about. But if you're in business, you probably know some of those documents. Like, I can't lose that document, and it can't be misrepresented or manipulated or copy created, et cetera. So in many cases, when we look at DTM, ECM is going to be included, and it's going to be part of the architecture. But there's in many cases another lens of even more critical content. Then in many cases, the compliance department is going to say, whoa, wait a minute, how are you managing those particular documents? And as we all know, it can get quite sensitive when the CFO and when the audit committee get involved and say, where are those documents? So again, asset management is one of the things we've kind of identified as something that is related to, but kind of different than just the traditional records management application that's part of an ECM suite. So when we actually take a look at enterprise content management, it's really going mobile now, and so there's a lot of people that are using mobile devices, and so we've identified this area of mobile content management that, again, is lighter weight than the full ECM stack, but usually integrates with it. So there's a lot of providers that are doing mobile content today, sometimes referred to as file sync and share. Larger enterprises generally have those things concatenated, meaning that the critical content flows over to the ECM, which might flow over to the asset management application. So anyway, when you look at managing content outside of the repository, that becomes really one of the big things when it's content on the go. How do you keep track of that? And that's one of the things when you look at mobile content management, we actually see that, security and, again, being able to keep track of things like, I'm signing off on a contract. It's on my tablet. Where does it go? So, again, those are some of the things when you look at the full life cycle of digital transaction management, enterprise architects are going to care about that. And, again, there's lightweight storage, but, where is the final resting place for that signed document once it's signed electronically? Is that all part of the overall process? And again, lightweight DTM may not require that, but when you're talking about repeatable transactions, that all has to be part of the overall approach and the architecture. And again, if you're a content architect, you know that. If you're a business person, you just need to basically ask the question of, hey, where's this stuff being stored, and is it secure? So that's one of the things we do is we kind of translate the tech talk into business jargon. And again, there's in a lot of enterprises, there's over 15 different content repositories. So let's kind of try to put this all together and say, well, what do you do about all this? How do I leverage it if I'm an enterprise? So a couple things. First, when you look at all the different business areas in an enterprise, sales is really one of the big areas that we see, and I'm going to come back to sales in a minute, but there's critical documents in almost every department. And, if you're in finance, you know that there's some things that are more critical than others, although, I have a lot of clients that are in finance, and they think every document's critical. Manufacturing as well, where you've got, manufacturing orders, you've got, inspection documents on equipment that was just received. There's all kinds of stuff that has to be signed off. If I'm in engineering as well, I might be signing off on a product requirements document that I need all of my engineering managers to sign off on. If I'm in human resources, the race to acquire talent. So all of these areas include critical content. And so, sales is one of those areas, but all the other ones are just as important too. So when we talk about where we are today in enterprise content management, what we see is we're just at the beginning. And when we're just at the beginning, where's one of the areas to start? We think it's sales. So why? Well, most CEOs get in trouble when they don't meet the revenue number, and that is tied to sales, whether it's indirect, direct, or a combination of all the above, both direct, indirect, inside, outside. And again, there's a lot of different things in a sales process where there's all kinds of content involved with it, but at the end of the day, when it comes down to the end of the month, the end of the quarter, I need to sign some contracts so I can basically, count that as an order, which means the company can count it as a piece of billable revenue. So we see signatures showing up in CRM applications in a big way, and we think there's going to be even more automation, but there's a fair amount of automation today and by the way, it's fairly easy to do where you can actually automate content assembly. You can apply signatures to it, and a sales representative in many cases can press the buttons. Even though there's people behind the scenes that set it all up for them, they can press the buttons, the customer can sign the document, and we've got an order. So again, DTM with a focus on sales, a great place to start. Doesn't mean that there aren't other important areas, but when you look at a beachhead, if you can do it and do it well in sales, and there's a lot of people that are just signing electronically in sales, and there's a lot that are not, it is a great place to start. One of the things we've also got is we've got a decision matrix. So if I just step back and say maybe I'm not in sales, I should focus on external focused business transactions first, because in many cases they're more intense and they're harder to do. So anyway, number two is focusing on some of the internal things. Now, if I'm in HR, I think onboarding and hiring people is very critical. And if I report to the CEO, I'm the head of HR, then that's probably going to be my top priority. So again, one of the things I would just say is, look at this matrix, and again, classifying. I mentioned that earlier. Making sure I can do the integration, I can do the basic deployment, make sure it works well before I get more complicated, and maybe later on even maybe really fully mobilize the capability. So those are some of the things to think about. And again, every group is different, but doing a pilot, as far as a takeaway from this is, if I'm leaving this webinar, what should I think about? I should think about where do I want to do my DTM pilot, which department, which group, and can I do the planning and make sure it's highly successful. So when we talk about digital business and innovation, we've got this approach which kind of deals with the current state and the future state. The current state is most CEOs are worried about their current product revenue, but they're also trying to figure out where are the future products and services going to come from. Now, the problem is that when we talk about digital business, one of the things that comes up is the fact that new services are coming online. So as the example I used earlier, where a mobile app can completely disrupt a traditional business process, and it's not just taxis, but it's even banking, What are those new services, and are they going to incorporate business processes, including, signing off on a transaction with my signature, or maybe even using my voice? When you look at the new digital services, those are the things that are the huge risk factors, and really the areas where we say is, how are we going to innovate? How can we eliminate some of those analog processes? That's really one of the things that's pretty important. And so what we would just say is, again, look at your current business processes and how do I take the document part of that, make it fully digital, and then, really you can speed things up. Things like accounts receivable, basically, the days to, if you can sign electronically, in some cases it's signed in hours, then I can bill it quicker too. So there's a lot of significant advantages. And the other thing is, by the way, people like to sign electronically. It's kind of fun. So that would be the other thing is, we've seen, people basically, get a higher satisfaction, like, wow, that firm was easy to do business with because they used e-signatures. So my last set of comments as far as my summary, and I'm going to turn it over to Rahim, is the paper era is definitely coming to an end, and meaning that the analog paper era. We're going to a fully digital era, and that digital transaction management is really, really one of the key steps. We're still at the very beginning of it because, again, it's a small fraction of the total number of documents that are being signed electronically. And we do think that one of the key things is mobile continues to grow. It's big now, but it's going to be even bigger by 2020. And mobile would be a key enablement to make sure that this continues to happen. Again, just make sure you think about, like, how am I using mobile and how can I make my processes more mobile friendly. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Stan.
Well, thanks very much, Jim. Great information. Just a quick reminder to members of our audience, if you haven't sent in a question yet, we invite you to please do so. Jim and Rahim will do our best to answer it during the Q&A segment of the webcast. Just type your question into the Q&A box and hit the submit button. We're going to go now to Rahim Kaba, Director of Product Marketing at eSign Live by Solanus. Rahim.
Hey, thank you, Stan, and thank you, Jim, in particular. That was a fantastic overview of the market for both the technical and the business folks, and some really great insight into how organizations are leveraging digital transaction solutions like e-signatures to move, like you said, Jim, from analog to fully digital processes. So that's fantastic, and thanks for the overview. All right. So again, my name is Rahim Kaba, Director of Product Marketing at eSign Live, and I'll take probably the next 15 to 20 minutes or so to talk to you about how to get started with e-signatures, some of those top use cases that you might be interested to know about, as well as the key evaluation criteria to consider as you shop around for solutions in the market. Now, although some of you are new to e-signatures, and it looks like probably around 50% of you are based on the initial poll that we gave out, it's important to note that e-signatures have been around for many years now. eSign Live, for example, has been providing solutions to the market since 1992, so that's a little over 23 years now. And since that time, our solution has really evolved to a large extent, so certainly in terms of functionality, security, and scalability. Now, what we've noticed in the last 18 months or so is a huge uptick in interest from the international community. E-signatures are no longer a U.S. or even a North American phenomenon. And as you can see by the heat map on this slide is that e-signatures are increasingly gaining adoption around the world. Our last count was that we have over 47 countries leveraging the eSign Live platform. And in the last year alone, we processed nearly 1 billion documents through our service. And that's a number which is constantly growing as e-signature usage continues to skyrocket around the world. So now organizations are adding e-signature capabilities to multiple enterprise applications and business processes. So a question that we often get asked is, how can I get started? Now there's a number of ways in which your organization can consume e-signatures. And you know what? This really largely depends on your use case. So whether that's a sender-driven ad hoc process or an integrated one where the system is actually generating that document for your customers. Now, we offer 3 flavors of eSign Live to satisfy the various use cases in the market, and I like to typically put that into 3 buckets here. Now, the first one on the left is our standalone, out-of-the-box solution, which largely fulfills the common e-contracting use cases in the market. For example, getting your sales contracts, like Jim was mentioning, your agreements electronically signed. And this is really a great place to dip your toes in the water because there's absolutely no development work required, no integration required. You simply upload your documents, select your signers, and really begin e-signing in minutes. So in the middle, we offer a number of pre-built connectors for third-party applications that you know and use every day, like Salesforce, SharePoint, Box, Dynamics CRM, and Office 365. With these connectors, we've done all of the integration work for you. So there's really minimal admin resources that are needed to really get started within these applications. And on the far right, you can enable, you can add e-signing capabilities to your own application. So whether that's your web portal, a core enterprise system, a homegrown solution, or even a legacy application. We have what's called a RESTful API, so the technical folks will be familiar with that. It's completely open, as well as fully supported SDKs to help you build your own custom e-signature integrations. So whether that's for your insurance portal or for your loan origination system or even your mobile app, as Jim was mentioning, mobile is huge and is going to continue to grow. eSign Live can really plug into any system or application that's out there. All right, so at a high level, if you really look at it, organizations are spending a lot of time and money to automate 2 key processes. So that's the front-end document creation system, which basically kicks out documents that a client needs to sign and typically goes to paper today. And then on the back end, you have document management or ECM type systems that once the paper copy comes back signed are often scanned back and archived into the system. But relying on paper, as we all know, leads to tons of inefficiencies and error-prone processes, particularly when documents are not in good order. And this is where the value of e-signatures comes into play. E-signatures can really help you keep that transaction completely digital from beginning to end with a real straight-through process, and enables you really to maximize your investment that you've already put into your front end and back end systems. So in this slide, I'm going to walk you through a typical digital transaction workflow with eSign Live. Actually, many years ago, we used to call this e-signature process management, which, to be completely transparent, didn't catch on. So whatever you want to call it, the entire digital process from beginning to end is completely flexible with our solution. You can pick and choose what you need and design your workflows around your specific requirements. So I'm going to go through each of these steps in detail, and we'll talk you through that. So the first step here is accessing the transaction. So participants need to get into the digital transaction somehow, and that can happen in several ways, including through an email notification, a link to a customer portal, for example, or an embedded link in a loan origination system as a very specific example. The second step here is authentication. Now, you definitely want and need multiple options for user authentication. That can include leveraging digital certificates, credentials, integration with third-party authentication services like Equifax, random password generation using SMS text codes, or even a combination of all of these. The third step is presenting the documents to the signer. So you need to have the flexibility to present those documents for review, either on paper or on the screen. And it might seem a little strange to review paper documents in an e-sign process, but if you think about it, it may not always be convenient for you to share your system with a customer, or the device might not even have sufficient screen real estate for reviewing those long documents. The fourth step is really about data capture. So chances are many of your forms have text boxes, check boxes, radio buttons, drop-down lists, and many other types of form fields. And that data needs to be inserted into the form before it can be signed. So we enable you to capture data and select options at the time of signing, and then make that data available to your downstream systems. The fifth step here is document insertion. So this is one of those steps that may or may not apply to your particular use case. But as an example, say that you have a wealth management advisor in the field meeting a new client. The rep may want to upload some additional proof of the client's ID. So you can take a photo of the client's driver's license, for example, and then upload that into the transaction. The sixth step is signing, and this is really the step that most people associate with e-signature solutions. And there are several options out there, like click to sign, handwritten signature capture using a signature capture pad, tablet touchscreen, mobile signature capture using your own device, etc. And with eSign Live, you can really select the capture method that is most appropriate for your specific user role or channel. And lastly is the document delivery. So this is all about getting those signed records to be distributed electronically or on paper. So while the document signing piece is the most well-known component of the transaction, under the hood, our solution really manages the entire digital transaction from beginning to end. All right. So on today's webcast, as I mentioned, we have a cross-section of individuals, and I've been told that there's folks from banks, credit unions, state, local, federal government, insurance companies, life sciences, and really a whole slew of other industries as well. So I just wanted to take a step back and look at some of the top e-signature use cases that we're seeing at eSign Live, but also that correspond to the folks that are really on the call today, both in the commercial space as well as in government organizations. So if you look at banks, insurance companies, and other financial services providers, many have moved their customer onboarding processes completely online. So if you're like me, you probably visited your financial institution one too many times to sign those paper documents. I know I just did that actually just 2 weeks ago when I had to sign documents for a credit card application. So instead of having to go into the branch and fill out that paperwork or wait for documents in the mail, financial services institutions are enabling their customers to complete and e-sign their applications completely online now. And then that means you never have to step foot in a branch with this type of process. And across all industries, we see many companies and governments alike digitize their contracting and their procurement processes with the help of e-signatures. This includes both internal purchase approvals as well as things like POs and NDAs for external parties. So speaking of internal processes, I've only mentioned it here under government, but this is truly applicable for any business or any industry. For example, one popular internal use case that we're seeing is around HR contracts to really digitally onboard new employees in an organization. Now, in the paper world, this is typically done with a large stack of paper that the new employee needs to review and sign when they join an organization, but all of this can be streamlined with e-signatures. We're also seeing organizations deploy e-signatures as an enterprise solution. So what I mean by that is, once the initial set of use cases are tested and proven, we're seeing organizations expand their usage across multiple lines of business and departments as the interest across the enterprise increases. All right, so like any other software category, it's important to take the time to perform a detailed software evaluation before signing up with an e-signature provider. And so what I wanted to do here is really talk to you about 5 key e-signature decision criteria to consider before making a decision. And from the poll initially, it looked like about 70 to 75% of you are either in education mode or shopping around for solutions. So I thought this would be a good place to talk about this stuff. So the first one is really about the ability to deploy the e-signature solution in the cloud or on premises. Now, many of the organizations that we speak to that are especially in the early stages of their evaluation may not have even decided how they want to deploy the solution. But regardless of how you want to deploy eSign Live, we offer you the exact same product, the exact same code base, and that means you can start developing using our API or our SDKs and deploy however and wherever you want. And if your needs and your policies, for example, your IT policies change over time, you have the flexibility to migrate from one deployment option to another or mix and match deployments depending on your needs or use cases within your organization. The next one is about white label branding, and this is an important differentiator in the market for eSign Live. In fact, the majority of our customer base completely white labels the eSign process. That means that their brand, our customer's brand, is always front and center during the transaction, not our brand. Now, many of you may not be familiar with eSign Live as a company, but if you've ever opened up a bank account online or applied for insurance online, you probably used eSign Live without even knowing it. That's because many of the world's most trusted brands out there white label eSign Live for their customer-facing digital transactions. And this is really one of those number one things that you can do to protect your brand and to also achieve the highest adoption rates possible. This is really about trust, right? You want to make sure that your customers trust the transaction from beginning to end, and you don't want your e-signature provider's brand dominating the transaction. So our solution really enables you to showcase your brand from beginning to end. When it comes to security, some of the e-signature providers will lead you to believe that security is a top priority for them or top of mind for them. But unless they've successfully completed certifications and have an external auditor's report to back it up, you can't really be sure that they're actually keeping your system and data secure. Now at eSign Live, we've actually successfully completed a SOC 2 certification to ensure that your company data and your customers' data is safe and secure. Now SOC 2 really keeps us as an organization honest and really ensures that we follow very specific and robust security best practices at all times without any exception. Lastly, you'll want to look for a proven e-signature vendor that offers an enterprise-grade offering. So make sure that the solution not only can scale across multiple lines of business for your organization's internal, business-to-business, and customer-facing applications, but can also help you expand your e-signature usage using a shared service model across the enterprise, both locally and abroad. And I'll talk a little bit about that in about 2 slides. Now, I purposely skipped over the part about audit trails because I really wanted to focus on that in this specific slide. So when you undergo an audit or your organization undergoes an audit, it's important for you to have really the most complete audit trails to ensure that you can easily and clearly demonstrate compliance. So the legal and compliance folks in your organizations kind of breathe this day in and day out, and this is what kind of keeps them up at night. That's why there's such an advantage to digital processes. You can actually collect data about how and when the transaction took place. Now, the signed document and the static audit trail, what we call a static audit trail, gives you reliable information about what was signed, but it really doesn't tell you how it was signed. And for that, we recommend leveraging an active audit trail. And think of an active audit trail as kind of a black box recorder of exactly how the process took place. So we have a patented solution that really captures all of the web pages, the documents, the disclosures, all the pop-up windows that came up during that process, exactly how it was displayed to the signer within the browser. And this makes it possible to completely replay the signing event even years after the fact, because sometimes those legal and compliance folks in the organization have to be able to prove compliance not only today, tomorrow, next week, but years after the fact as well. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, e-signatures are now really a global phenomenon, and we're not only seeing organizations in regions like Europe, Asia Pacific, use e-signatures to take their businesses digital, but we're also seeing North American companies expand their current usage of e-signatures across additional lines of business and departments in all regions around the world. So a key concern in the market today as organizations leverage the economies of scale in the cloud is around data residency. Now, in certain geographies, it's important to ensure that data and documents never leave a particular country or region. Sorry about that. This past summer, we were extremely excited to announce the expansion of eSign Live into 6 new international markets through a strategic partnership with IBM. So in addition to our existing deployments in the US and Canada, we now offer customers around the world with both public and private instances of eSign Live in the UK, Germany, Australia, Japan, Brazil, and Singapore. And these are more global cloud locations than any other e-signature provider in the market today. Our customers have really identified data residency as an important factor in taking their businesses digital. And this is really particular as it relates to customer data, and very specific also to regulated and compliance industries such as financial services and life sciences who need to actually know exactly where their transactional data resides. I know we're kind of getting close to the hour here. I just have one more slide to go and we can take a couple of questions. But many of the businesses that we speak to, their main question is, how do I get started? Where do I start? So we've helped companies really with the most simple to the most complex signing and automation requirements. So if you're leading the digital transformation initiative within your company, most of the colleagues you involve quickly can see the value of what you're doing. But it's the execution part that becomes a bit tricky. So we recommend really a three-step approach here to get your digitization efforts underway. And like Jim mentioned earlier, the focus is really on to get that pilot project out of the way and started. So we recommend in the first step here to schedule a use case workshop internally to identify and prioritize primary use cases in the organization. So internal stakeholders will help identify which processes are holding you back in terms of efficiencies. The second step here is really about being able to document the current process and then compare it against the future process with e-signatures. So make sure that you outline where you're eliminating steps from the workflow using technologies like e-signature. And the last step is really to define your requirements based on the use cases, so the e-signature features and other needs like white label branding, like we mentioned, security, audit, and compliance, to really help you get started and put together that short list of providers that can meet your specific needs. All right, so I'm at the end of my slides here. I'm going to send it back to Stan to kind of start taking a couple of questions, and then we'll wrap it up.
All right, Raheem. Well, thanks very much for some interesting information. Well, we do have a number of very interesting questions in the queue, so let's dive right in. The first question goes to Jim. Jim, why are business people so focused on DTM and IT people sometimes aren't?
Well, it comes back to the big question of speed and velocity of business. The business side really feels pressure to compete and to execute and conduct business faster. So when they're looking at what others are doing, they're seeing others move faster, and they're feeling like, wait a minute, why aren't we? So it's almost like what keeps me up at night. Paper is keeping a lot of executives up at night.
All right, next question. We're working on an iOS app and would be interested in adding e-sign to it. How would that work?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So it really is going to depend on the integration points, but what I didn't mention actually in today's webcast is that we offer what we call an iOS SDK. So similar to what I was talking about in terms of adding e-sign capabilities to your web portals and your enterprise applications, we have a specific iOS SDK that enables you to add e-signing capabilities to your own mobile app. So that's really for a lot of our customers that want to keep that process within one specific app. You don't want to be actually sending them to our eSign Live app for the signature process and then send them back to your own application, your mobile app, to finish the process. So the iOS SDK really allows you to keep that process from beginning to end inside of your own mobile app so that you can capture the signature. So if anybody's interested in information about that, we can certainly talk to you individually about how you can leverage that. And we provide that completely out of the box, and you can start leveraging and testing on it right away.
All right, we have time for one more question, and Raheem, I think this one is going to go back to you. Are the audit trail features you spoke about included in your solution?
Yes, they are. So I talked about two aspects there. So the first is the static audit trail, which is, of course, out of the box with our solution. We actually embed the audit trail of who signed, in what order, and when directly inside of the PDF document. So that's great for portability, so you don't have to worry about storing that specific audit trail with another document. It stays together with the PDF signed document. We also have what's called the active audit trail, which I mentioned. So it's kind of that recording of how that audit process took place, how the signing process took place. And that's also included with all of our editions of eSign Live as well.
Thanks very much, Raheem. Well, that is all the time we have in this live interactive webcast. Our sincere thanks to our presenters, Jim Lundy, founder and CEO of Aragon Research, and Raheem Kaba, Director of Product Marketing at eSign Live by Solanus, for explaining how to get rid of paper and fully digitize high-value document systems. For more information on the topic of e-signatures and digital transaction management, please click on the green resources icon on your screen. And please do take just a moment to complete the post-webcast survey. And thanks so much for joining us. For eSign Live by Solanus and IDG, I'm Stan Gibson.